The new organization would be called the National Liberation Front, the NLF. The armed wing of the NLF was called the People's Liberation Armed Forces, but its enemies in Saigon and Washington preferred a more disparaging term. In their eyes, the revolutionaries were communist traitors to the Vietnamese Nation, the Viet Cong.
To any Vietnamese person who hears the statement, it sounds absurd. However, to highlight this argument entirely, William Turley writes in his The Second Indochina War, the term Viet Cong, originally a contraction of Viet Nam Cong San, communist traitor to Vietnam, was a pejorative label that the Saigon government's first premier, Ngo Dinh Diem, affixed to his opponents, communist or not. With the passage of time, the term also came to be understood among supporters of Saigon as a contraction of Viet Nam Cong San, meaning Vietnamese Communist. To understand why translating Viet Cong to mean communist traitor to Vietnam or Vietnamese communist traitor sounds ridiculous, the phrase must be analyzed. The first word, Viet, is an adjective referring to Vietnamese. Cong is the first word in Cong San, meaning communist. Alone, neither of these words mean traitor, which is why this translation doesn't exactly sound correct. Let's look at the two possible extensions of Viet Cong, Viet Nam Cong San and Viet Nam Cong San. In the first extended phrase, Yan means traitor, and in the second extended phrase, Vietnam refers to the country. The traitor translation makes sense for the first translation, but not for the second. The key to finding out what Viet Cong actually means is to figure out which of these two extensions are correct. To study the root of each word's meaning, we can compare it with Chinese. Something many English speakers do not know is that many Vietnamese words have a Chinese root, due to history. This is true for Korean and Japanese as well. Some scholars have attributed as much as 70% of the Vietnamese vocabulary to Chinese word loaning. Because of this, using direct comparison with Chinese is quite useful when trying to understand the root of many Vietnamese words. Anyways, China has a phrase that actually means Han traitor, Han Jian. The Vietnamese word Yan is a loan word from the Chinese Jian. In this phrase, Han is the ethnic group of China, just like Viet is for Vietnam. Then the word Jian means traitor. The translation that Han Jian means Han traitor makes sense. In North Vietnam, the phrase Viet Yan was actually in use under the Viet Minh and Ho Chi Minh. However, the phrase in use during the American-Vietnam War is not Viet Yan, but Viet Cong. There's a distinction between the use of both of these phrases. Let's add to this analysis. Additionally, the Vietnamese word Cong San is also a loan word from Chinese, Gong Chan. The Chinese equivalent to Viet Cong would actually be Han Gong. Would the phrase Han Gong mean communist traitor to the nation, or just Han communist? Or would Han Gong Jian be a better fit for this meaning? Because of these root words of the phrase, to a Vietnamese person, the phrase would truly mean Vietnamese communist traitor if the phrase were Viet Cong Yan or Viet Yan instead of just Viet Cong. In these cases, the translation makes complete sense. However, that's not the case. Directly compare this to English. Suppose the phrase Americom was in use. Expanded, it could either be American communist traitor to the nation or simply American communist. Looking at this comparison, it does not sound realistic to refer to Americom as the first phrase rather than the second, because neither portion of this phrase refers to a traitor or treason. The Vietnamese phrase is the same. Again, neither word refers to the idea of treason. However, word analysis is not all that can be used. There is historical sourcing. Looking at the Pentagon Papers, a contemporary source for the use of the phrase Viet Cong, it clearly states, beginning in 1956, the Saigon press began to refer to Viet Cong, a fairly precise and not necessarily disparaging rendition of Vietnamese communist. This is pretty damning evidence against the translation pushed by Turley and Burns. By contrast, in this portion of William Turley's book, a citation is not given, so it is not possible to trace their source. The original 1956 newspapers do not seem to be documented online and unfortunately may be lost forever. Even if those early papers used the phrase Viet Cong, we need to have read them to determine their use, Were they used directly with the phrase Viet Cong San, or were they just used as is? If they were simply used as is in those articles, then using the translation to mean traitor is a mistranslation. Another wartime source, a government poster, uses the phrase Viet Cong San. However, the Juhoi program that this poster refers to was not started until 1963, so it is not possible for this to be the source of the 1956 start of the term Viet Cong. Additionally, it hints that the phrase Viet Cong San may just be a play on words of the original Viet Cong phrase already in use. Without concrete evidence from these 1956 newspapers, pushing this translation concretely is incredibly biased. This understanding of the phrase is pushed commonly in mainstream media, and it appears that these media producers most likely don't speak Vietnamese and didn't question this translation at all. Until these newspapers are scanned and cited, this translation should not be used. All that said, where does the meaning of a phrase truly come from? For most of the war, 1956 onwards, most Americans and South Vietnamese used it as slang meaning Vietnamese Communist. It begs the question, does the meaning of this phrase depend on what Ngo Dinh Diem supposedly created and affixed to his opponents at the phrase's very beginning back in 1956, or should it mean what the majority of Vietnamese and Americans alike used the term to refer to during the war and after it? Just Vietnamese Communist. It seems that these pieces of media are all pushing this translation just to make South Vietnamese regimes appear irrational and push the orthodox narrative of the Vietnam War, where South Vietnam never had a chance.